Chapter 1. The Gilded Cage. The air in Bangkok was a living thing, a wet, hot blanket that clung to Lila Carter's skin and filled her lungs with the smell of diesel, street food, and rain-soaked pavement. After 3 days of navigating the city's chaotic embrace, the air-conditioned van that came for her felt like a mobile slice of heaven. For an hour, she watched the urban sprawl melt away, replaced by a relentless, suffocating green. The jungle pressed in on the narrow road, a riot of life so dense it seemed to swallow the sound of the engine. This was it. A new country, a new life, a chance to outrun the ghost that sat in the passenger seat of her memory, the one with a phantom hand on the radio dial and a smile that she could only ever half remember. Guilt was a heavy coat, and she had traveled halfway around the world to finally take it off. The van turned off the main road onto a gravel path marked by 2 imposing, moss-covered stone elephants. The jungle canopy closed overhead, plunging the path into a perpetual twilight. After another 5 minutes of crawling along the winding track, they emerged into a clearing. Serenity Haven Spa was less a building and more a monument. It was an old, colonial-style mansion, a 2-story behemoth of whitewashed walls and dark teakwood, crowned with a traditional Thai-tiled roof whose eaves curved upwards like a prayer. It was magnificent, but in the deep shadows of the jungle, it looked less like a sanctuary and more like a mausoleum. Manicured gardens, filled with vibrant orchids and frangipani, fought a losing battle against the encroaching wilderness. The scent of jasmine hung in the air, thick and sweet, but underneath it, Lila detected something else, something faint and coppery, like old pennies or dried blood. That a woman was waiting for her on the veranda. She was ageless, her posture as straight and unyielding as the bamboo stalks that lined the property. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a traditional silk sin that shimmered even in the muted light. "Miss Carter," the woman said. Her voice was smooth, melodic, but held no warmth. "I am Madame Samchai. Welcome to Serenity Haven." "Thank you for having me," Lila managed, trying to return a smile that felt brittle on her lips. Madame Samchai's eyes, dark and intelligent, swept over Lila, a silent, unnerving appraisal. "Your credentials are satisfactory. Your hands, we hope, are as skilled as your resume suggests. Our clientele expects a transcendent experience." Lila followed her inside. The oppressive humidity of the jungle was replaced by a cool, still air that didn't feel like it came from an air conditioner. It was the cold of a cellar, of a place long sealed from the sun. The interior was a labyrinth of polished teakwood floors and silk-paneled walls. Gilded statues of Buddha sat in recessed alcoves, their serene expressions somehow accusatory. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft whisper of their footsteps. "Your work hours will be from dusk until dawn," Madame Samchai stated, gliding through a hallway lined with numbered doors. "We find the energies are more conducive to healing at night. You will be assigned a room in the staff quarters. The rules are simple. You will perform your duties with discretion and excellence. You will not speak of our clients, and you will respect the traditions of this house." She stopped before a door marked with the number 1. "This will be one of your rooms. All 12 are unique." Lila peered inside. It was beautiful, decorated in rich crimsons and golds. An ornate, full-length mirror with a heavy, carved frame dominated one wall. Felt heavy. The air felt thick with unspoken history. "You came to Thailand to escape a tragedy," Madame Samchai said, her back still to Lila. It wasn't a question. Lila froze, the blood draining from her face. "How did you?" Madame Samchai turned, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. "This is a place of healing, Miss Carter. For our clients and sometimes for our staff. We all have our ghosts. The secret is not to run from them, but to learn how to make them serve you." The words hung in the chilling air, cryptic and sinister. Lila looked from the woman's unreadable face to the dark, waiting rooms. She had come here seeking serenity, but the gilded cage of the spa felt like it was built from the bones of 1,000 secrets. And as Madame Samchai glided away down the silent hall, Lila had the suffocating feeling that she hadn't outrun her ghost at all. She had just traded it for a dozen more. Chapter 2. The Scroll of Whispers. Lila's first official day began as the sun bled out of the sky, staining the jungle canopy in hues of orange and bruised purple. The spa came alive at night, a nocturnal flower unfurling its petals. Soft, instrumental Thai music, a pip-hat ensemble, began to drift from hidden speakers, a gentle melody that did little to soothe the knot of anxiety in Lila's stomach. She found her uniform laid out in her small, Spartan room in the staff wing. A simple black silk tunic and trousers. Also on the bed was a small, silver amulet on a leather cord. It was cool to the touch, intricately carved with geometric patterns she didn't recognize. She slipped it over her head, the metal resting against her sternum like a tiny shield that in the staff briefing room. The other therapists gathered. There were about 10 of them, mostly Thai women, their faces polite but closed. They moved with a quiet, practiced grace, their eyes avoiding direct contact. An older, stern-faced woman named Anong seemed to be the de facto leader, her instructions delivered in a low, firm voice. Lila tried to introduce herself, but received only clipped nods in return. The camaraderie she was used to in American spas, the easy gossip, the shared complaints, was starkly absent. Here, the silence was a currency, and no one seemed willing to spend it. Just as the briefing ended, a younger therapist approached Lila. Her name was Malaya, and her eyes were wide with a fear so palpable it seemed to vibrate in the air around her. She was clutching a small, rolled-up scroll tied with a red string. "You are the new one," Malaya whispered, her English accented but clear. She pressed the scroll into Lila's hand. Her own were trembling. "You must read this. You must understand." "What is it?" Lila asked, unrolling the scroll. It was old parchment, brittle at the edges, covered in elegant Thai script with a hastily scrawled English translation below each line. "The rules," Malaya breathed, glancing nervously over her shoulder towards the main hall, where Madame Samkai's shadow could be seen moving. "For this house, they are not suggestions. They are survival." Before Lila could ask more, Anong's sharp voice cut through the room. "Malaya, room 7. A client is waiting." Fear flashed in Malaya's eyes, stark and raw. She gave Lila one last, desperate look. "Don't be like the others," she whispered, so faintly Lila almost missed it. "Don't disappear." Then she was gone, scurrying away like a frightened mouse. Lila looked down at the scroll. The paper felt ancient, imbued with the touch of countless, fearful hands. The English translations were stark, devoid of explanation. The 12 rules of serenity: never look into the mirror in room 1 after midnight. Always knock 3 times before entering room 2, even if it's empty. Do not light incense in room 3 unless instructed by Madame Samchai. Never leave the door to room 4 open during a session. Always wear the amulet provided when working in room 5. Do not speak the client's name aloud in room 6. Never turn off the lights in room 7. Always offer tea to the client in room 8 before starting. Do not touch the lotus flowers in room 9. Always lock the window in room 10 before a session. Never sleep in room 11, even during breaks. Always say a prayer to the Buddha statue in room 12 before leaving. Lila read the list twice. It was bizarre. A collection of superstitions and strange protocols that made no logical sense. Never look in a mirror? Don't touch the flowers? It felt like an elaborate hazing ritual, a way to intimidate the new American girl. She was a professional, trained in anatomy and kinesiology, not folklore and ghost stories. She wanted to dismiss it, to laugh it off as cultural eccentricity. But the memory of Malaya's terror was a cold stone in her gut. She thought of Madame Samkai's cryptic words about ghosts. "The secret is to learn how to make them serve you." A small bell chimed, signaling the arrival of the first clients. Lila tucked the scroll into her pocket, the brittle paper crinkling against the silk. She told herself it was just a job, a weird job, but a job nonetheless. She would keep her head down, do her work, and ignore the hysterical superstitions of a nervous girl. It was a decision she would come to regret sooner than she could possibly imagine. Chapter 3. The first transgression. Lila's first few sessions passed in a blur of strained professionalism. The clients were wealthy, silent, and demanding. They lay on the massage tables like offerings on an altar, their faces impassive. Lila needed their knotted muscles, her hands moving with a skill that felt disconnected from her buzzing mind. She was assigned to rooms 9 and 10, and she found herself subconsciously obeying the rules. She averted her eyes from the pristine white lotus flowers floating in a bowl in room 9. She double-checked the lock on the large window overlooking the jungle in room 10. Just to be safe, she told herself. Just respecting the house customs. Her shift was supposed to end at 2 a.m., but Anong informed her that she was expected to stay late to help clean and prepare the rooms for the next night. It was grunt work, but Lila was too new to complain. Her final task was to polish the furniture and mirrors in room 1. The room was empty, silent. The air was still and thick with the lingering scent of massage oil and something else, something faintly floral and cloying, like funeral wreaths. Lila worked methodically, wiping down the teakwood tables and cabinets, her movements fueled by exhaustion. Finally, only the large, ornate mirror remained. It was a magnificent piece, the frame a riot of carved dragons and smiling deities. The glass was old, slightly warped, giving the reflection a subtle, funhouse quality. She sprayed the cleaner and began to wipe it down, her mind a million miles away, replaying the accident, the screech of tires, the shattering glass. She finished and stepped back to admire her work. She checked her watch. 12:04 a.m. without thinking. Driven by a lifetime of habit, she leaned in to check her reflection, tucking a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. For a split second, she saw herself, tired, pale, her blue eyes wide in the dim light. Then, the reflection flickered, like a faulty television screen. Her own face dissolved, melting away like wax. In its place, something else took shape within the silvered depths. It was a woman's head, floating in the center of the mirror. Its long, black hair drifted as if underwater. Its eyes were wide, burning with a malevolent fire. But it was what was below the head that made Lila's breath catch in her throat. A strangled, silent scream. There was no body. Instead, a tangle of raw, pulsating organs. A heart, lungs, glistening intestines, dangled from the severed neck, dripping a dark, spectral fluid onto the floor of the reflected room. It was a Phi Kraju. The name bloomed in her mind, a piece of folklore she'd read on a blog about Thailand, a vengeful, gluttonous spirit. The thing in the mirror turned its head slowly, its movements horribly fluid. Its eyes, burning with ancient hatred, locked onto Lila's. A connection, cold and sharp as a needle of ice, shot from the mirror into her mind. She felt a phantom sensation of hunger, a grotesque, gnawing emptiness that wasn't hers. She smelled the scent of blood, of raw meat. She felt an urge to unhinge her jaw, to feed, to tear. Lila broke the gaze, stumbling backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry. She fell against a small table, sending a vase of orchids crashing to the floor. The sound shattered the spell. She looked back at the mirror. Her own terrified face stared back at her, alone. The room was empty. There was no floating head, no dripping viscera. But the air was thick with a new scent, the undeniable, putrid stench of decay and slaughter. And the hunger, that vile, alien hunger, still echoed in the pit of her stomach. She scrambled out of the room, slamming the door behind her. She leaned against the wall in the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Rule number 1. Never look into the mirror in room 1 after midnight. It wasn't a superstition. It wasn't a prank. It was a warning. The scroll in her pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The horrors of Serenity Haven were not just in the stories of a frightened girl. They lived in the very architecture of the spa, waiting behind the doors, reflected in the glass. And she had just looked one of them in the eye. Chapter 4. Echoes and Omens. Sleep offered no escape. Lila's dreams were a chaotic slideshow of horror. A floating head with her own eyes, the phantom taste of blood, the screech of tires on wet asphalt. She woke up tangled in her sweat-damp sheets, the last vestiges of a scream caught in her throat. The sun was high, but its light seemed thin and weak, unable to penetrate the thick, oppressive atmosphere of the spa grounds. The following nights were a masterclass in quiet terror. Lila moved through her shifts like a ghost herself, her senses dialed to an impossible level of alertness. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a candle, every whisper of wind in the jungle outside was a potential threat. The spa, once just unsettling, now felt actively predatory. She noticed things she had previously dismissed. The lotus flowers in room 9 were indeed unnatural. She watched them for an entire hour one afternoon and saw that their petals never drooped. Their water never clouded. They were perfect, pristine, and utterly lifeless. She paid close attention to the other therapists. They were a sisterhood of fear, bound by the same unspoken terror. She saw how Anong would press her lips together in a silent prayer before entering any room. She saw how a young therapist named Dao would meticulously measure the T for room 8, her hands steady but her eyes full of dread. They all followed the rules with the rigid precision of soldiers navigating a minefield. Their fear was a quiet, constant hum beneath the spa's placid surface. Lila tried to ask about Malaya, the girl who had given her the scroll. "Where did Malaya go?" she asked Dao during a rare quiet moment in the staff kitchen. "I haven't seen her since my first night." Dao stopped wiping a cup and stared into the sink, her knuckles white. "Malaya took some time off," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Her mother is sick." It was a lie and they both knew it. The words were hollow, rehearsed. Lila pressed, her voice low. "She was scared. She told me not to disappear." "What did she mean?" Dao looked up, her eyes pleading. "Please," she whispered, darting a look towards the hallway. "Don't ask. It's better. For you. Just follow the rules. All of them. Never forget." Anong entered the kitchen then, her presence sucking the air from the room. She gave Lila a look of pure steel. "There is work to be done. Idle gossip is an indulgence we cannot afford." The message was clear. Don't dig. Don't ask questions. Conform. Survive. The next evening, Lila was assigned a client in room 4. The rule was simple. Never leave the door to room 4 open during a session. Lila was certain she had closed it, had heard the soft click of the latch. But midway through the deep tissue massage, her client, a burly German tourist, yelped. "Was this das?" he grunted. "Stop pinching me." Lila's hands were on his shoulders. "I'm not pinching you," she said, confused. "Something is, on my leg. It feels like little needles." Lila felt a chill crawl up her spine. She looked at the door. It was open, just a crack. A sliver of the dimly lit hallway was visible. She hadn't left it open. She was sure of it. Throughout the rest of the session, the client fidgeted and complained. His watch, left on a side table, clattered to the floor. The scented candles flickered wildly, though there was no draft. A small, invisible chaos was dancing around the room. Lila felt its presence, a mischievous, malicious energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. A Phi Fong, a trickster ghost. When the session was over and the client had gone, still muttering about the unprofessional service, Lila checked his back. Across his left calf were 3 thin, red scratches, angry and precise. As if drawn by a razor, her blood ran cold. She had left the door open, or it had been opened, and the rule had been broken. The consequences weren't explosive or deadly. Not this time. They were subtle, insidious, an act of supernatural vandalism designed to torment and discredit her. That night, back in the relative safety of her own room, she found herself staring at the small silver amulet she wore. It was no longer just a piece of company-issued jewelry. It was a lifeline. She went to the hidden staff shrine she had discovered behind a loose panel in her wardrobe. It was a small, dusty alcove containing a bowl of dried rice, burnt-out incense sticks, and a faded, sepia-toned photograph. The photo was of a young Thai woman in traditional dress, her face beautiful but etched with a deep sadness. Lila looked closer, her heart beginning to pound. The woman's eyes, the shape of her face. It was the face from the mirror, the face of the Kraju. The rules, the ghosts, the history of this place, it was all connected. A vast, terrifying tapestry of pain and vengeance. And she was now caught in its threads. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Past. The days bled into a routine of tense, nocturnal labor. Lila existed in a state of hypervigilance, the 12 rules her new religion. Each knock, each prayer, each locked window was a ritual performed with life or death seriousness. The spa's facade of tranquility seemed, to her, like a thin layer of ice over a churning, black abyss. Her curiosity, however, refused to be silenced. It was a stubborn, desperate itch. If she was going to survive this place, she needed to understand it. She needed to know the story behind the ghosts. An opportunity arose one evening when 2 American clients, wives of some diplomat or CEO, were gossiping in the lounge area while waiting for their appointments. They spoke in hushed but carrying tones, assuming the Thai staff couldn't understand them. Lila, refilling their lemongrass tea, lingered nearby, pretending to adjust the orchids on a table. "I swear, this place gives me the creeps," the first woman, a blonde with too much jewelry, whispered. "But Steven says the deep tissue massage here is the only thing that helps his back." "I know what you mean, Cynthia," the other replied, fanning herself with a menu. "It's beautiful, but it feels heavy. Did you ever hear the stories about the old mansion?" "Which ones?" "I've heard a dozen." "About the massacre," the second woman said, her voice dropping lower. "Back in the 50s or 60s. It was owned by some wealthy Thai official who had a young, beautiful wife. The story goes he was having an affair with one of the maids. The wife found out, went insane with jealousy, and poisoned the husband, the maid, and their 2 small children before hanging herself from the rafters in the main hall." Lila froze, her hand hovering over a pedal. Poison, jealousy, children. It was a shopping list of tragedy. "Good heavens," Cynthia gasped. "How awful. They say the house was empty for decades." The woman continued, clearly relishing the macabre tale. "Nobody would buy it. Locals said it was cursed, haunted by a Phi Tai Hong, the ghost of someone who dies a violent, angry death. The most vengeful kind of spirit there is. They say the maid's spirit wanders, too, eternally hungry." Eternally hungry. The words echoed the vile sensation Lila had felt when she'd looked into the mirror. The Kraju. "So how did Madame Samchai end up with it?" Cynthia asked. The second woman shrugged, taking a sip of tea. "Who knows? That woman is a mystery herself. They say she has connections to the old ways, that she made some kind of deal with the spirits of the house, appeased them or controlled them. That's why the business is so successful. It's built on dark energy." Their conversation was cut short as Madame Samchai emerged from her office, a silent, gliding shark. Her presence was an instant extinguisher of gossip. She smiled thinly at the 2 women. "Ladies, your therapists are ready for you." The women fell silent, their faces suddenly pale. They scurried off towards their assigned rooms without another word. Madame Samchai's dark eyes flickered towards Lila, a silent acknowledgement that she had been listening. There was no anger in her gaze, only a cold, unnerving amusement. The story settled in Lila's gut like a stone. A massacre, a Phi Tai Hong, a pact with the spirits. It wasn't just folklore. It was the spa's origin story. Madame Samchai hadn't cleansed the house of its horrors. She had harnessed them. She had turned a cursed mansion into a supernatural gold mine, with the clients as unwitting consumers and the staff as collateral damage, keepers of a terrible secret. Each of the 12 rooms, Lila began to suspect, was not just a massage room. It was a cage, a habitat designed for a specific, tormented spirit, its unique tragedy dictating the strange rule that kept it contained. And she, Lila Carter, was one of its zookeepers. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. The knowledge changed everything. The abstract fear Lila felt now had a name and a history. The spa wasn't just haunted, it was weaponized. Every gilded Buddha, every silk panel felt like part of a sophisticated containment system. Her purpose here, she now understood, was not just to massage tired muscles, but to participate in a nightly ritual that kept a chorus of vengeful spirits placated. Her focus shifted from mere survival to observation. She started a small journal, hidden with the staff shrine in her room, documenting every strange occurrence, every whisper, every feeling. She sketched the symbol from the amulet. She wrote down the story of the massacre. She was no longer just a victim of the house. She was its investigator. She began to piece things together. Room 1, with the mirror, held the betrayed maid, the Kraju. The rule was to prevent the spirit from finding a new host. The stories of jealousy and poison must be linked to other rooms, other rules. A few nights later, the theory was proven again. Anong, in a rare moment of near camaraderie, advised Lila before her shift. "You have room 2 tonight. Remember the rule. Be precise. 3 times. No more, no less." Lila approached the door to room 2, her heart a steady drum of apprehension. The rule was simple. Always knock 3 times before entering room 2, even if it's empty. Felt foolish, knocking on an empty room. But she remembered the scratches on the man from room 4, the consequence of a seemingly minor infraction. She raised her hand and knocked firmly on the teakwood door. Knock, knock, knock. She waited a moment, then opened the door. The room was pristine, smelling of lemongrass and ginger. Nothing seemed out of place. She prepared her table, her oils, her towels. But as she worked, a strange, intrusive thought wormed its way into her mind. It was a flash of a gruesome image. Her own hands, twisted into claws, tearing at the flesh of the client who would soon be lying on the table. An overwhelming, savage desire to bite, to consume, to devour. It was so vivid, so visceral, that she gasped and dropped a bottle of oil, which thankfully didn't break. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her shaken and nauseous. She felt the phantom taste of blood in her mouth. That was it. That was the consequence she had averted. The Phi Pop, a cannibalistic spirit that possessed its victims. The 3 knocks were not a polite gesture. They were a ritualistic ward, a password that told the hungry entity, "Not today." Not this one. Lila's world was unraveling. The neat seams between reality and nightmare coming completely undone. She saw the truth of the spa with stark, terrifying clarity. Madame Samchai wasn't just a cunning businesswoman. She was a warden. She had taken the raw, chaotic energy of a great tragedy and structured it, contained it, monetized it. The 12 rules were the bars of the cages. The question that burned in Lila's mind was what happened when a rule was broken so badly that the cage burst open. What had happened to Malay? What would happen to Lila if she made a fatal mistake? The answer, she suspected, was simple and absolute. She would disappear. She would become another part of the spa's dark history, another whisper in its haunted halls, another secret hidden behind its gilded facade. The thought didn't paralyze her with fear. It lit a fire. She wasn't going to disappear. She was going to find a way to fight back. Chapter 7. A Test of Faith. The dread began as soon as Anong read out the evening's assignments. Lila, room 5. The words hung in the air. Room 5. Always wear the amulet provided when working in room 5. Lila's hand instinctively went to her chest, her fingers closing around the cool, intricate silver. It felt impossibly small, a flimsy piece of metal against a tide of unseen horrors. The room itself was decorated in serene blues and whites, with motifs of water lilies and cranes. It should have been calming, but the air was thick with a profound and ancient sorrow. It felt like walking into a memory of loss, a grief so heavy it had become a physical presence in the room. Lila felt a phantom ache deep in her own womb, a chilling, hollow sensation that made her shiver. Her client was a young, glowing woman, perhaps 7 or 8 months pregnant. Her name was Mrs. Sirisopa, and her husband, a wealthy Thai businessman, waited for her in the lounge. She was radiant, her hand resting almost constantly on the curve of her belly. "First time?" Mrs. Sirisopa asked kindly as she settled onto the massage table, her voice a soft melody. "At this spa, yes," Lila answered, forcing a smile as Lila began the gentle prenatal massage. The room's oppressive sadness intensified. She could almost hear a faint, heartbroken weeping on the edge of hearing, a sound like wind through a cracked window pane. She focused on her work, her hands moving over the client's swollen back, trying to ignore the cold dread coiling in her stomach. She clutched the amulet. The silver grew warm against her skin, a tiny point of heat in the room's pervasive chill. The phantom weeping seemed to recede, held at bay by the small charm. Suddenly, Mrs. Sirisopa gasped, her body tensing under Lila's hands. "Oh!" she cried out, her voice sharp with pain. "The baby, something's wrong. It's a sharp pain, a cramp." Panic, cold and absolute, seized Lila. The weeping in the room grew louder, closer, filled with a terrible, jealous rage. Lila saw a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. A wispy, gray form, vaguely female, hunched and grieving. The Phi Tython Clom, the ghost of a pregnant woman who had lost her child. "Breathe," Lila said, her own voice trembling. She didn't know what else to do. Her medical training was useless against this. Her fingers, still touching the amulet at her neck, tightened into a fist. She squeezed the charm hard, pouring all her focus, all her will into that single point of contact. Protect her, she thought, a desperate, silent plea to whatever power the small piece of silver held. Please, protect her. The amulet grew intensely hot, almost burning her fingers. A wave of warmth radiated from it, pushing back against the room's supernatural cold. The ghostly form in the corner shrieked, a sound of pure agony and frustration that vibrated in Lila's bones, and then dissolved into nothing. Instantly, the pressure in the room vanished. The weeping stopped. Mrs. Sirisopa took a deep, shuddering breath, her body relaxing. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice weak with relief. "The pain, it's gone." "What was that?" "Just a muscle spasm, I think," Lila lied, her heart still jackhammering against her ribs. "Sometimes the baby shifts into a strange position." She finished the session in a haze, her hands shaking. As she helped the client up, Mrs. Sirisopa touched her arm. "Thank you," she said, her eyes full of gratitude. I felt a terrible cold. And then it was warm. You have very healing hands." Lila knew it wasn't her hands. It was the amulet. She had been standing between that unsuspecting mother and a spectral predator, a spirit whose grief was so powerful it sought to share its tragedy. The rule wasn't just a guideline. It was armor. And tonight, she had seen just how sharp the blade could be. Chapter 8. The Weight of Silence. Her next assignment was Room 6. The memory of her near disaster in Room 5 left Lila feeling raw and exposed, her nerves stripped bare. She reread the rule for Room 6 on the tattered scroll, her finger tracing the stark command. "Do not speak the client's name aloud in Room 6. It seemed innocuous compared to mirrors that held monsters and ghosts that attacked the unborn. In her training in the States, using a client's name was lesson 101 in building rapport and trust. "How is that pressure, Mr. Smith?" "Just relax, Sarah." It was a tool of her trade. To be forbidden from using it felt unnatural, like being told to massage with one hand tied behind her back. The room was bathed in a deep, verdant green, with intricate carvings of jungle vines covering the walls. It felt claustrophobic, as if the wilderness outside was trying to reclaim the space. Her client was a stoic, middle-aged man with the weary eyes of a high-powered executive. His registration form read Mr. Chen. As she worked on the tight knots in his shoulders, the silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The professional part of her brain screamed to break it. Just ask him, "Is this pressure okay, Mr. Chen?" It's polite. It's professional. She opened her mouth, the name Mr. Chen forming on her tongue at a T that exact moment. The feeling in the room shifted. A new presence emerged from the silence. It wasn't cold like room 5. It was hot, prickly, and intensely focused. Lila felt as if a pair of invisible eyes were boring into her, scrutinizing her every move. The air crackled with a potent, venomous jealousy. She snapped her mouth shut, the unspoken name dying in her throat. The feeling receded slightly, but it didn't disappear. It lingered in the corners of the room, a predator waiting for its trigger word. The entire session was a battle of wills. Lila fought against a lifetime of training and habit, forcing herself into a monastic silence. Every time the thought of the client's name surfaced in her mind, the jealous energy in the room would surge, the invisible eyes narrowing with suspicion. She could feel its attention shift from her to the man on the table, a wave of possessive, hateful energy directed at him. Phi Frey, the ghost of jealousy. She pictured the wife from the mansion massacre, the one who had murdered her family in a fit of rage. Was this her? Was this room her domain, where any hint of personal connection was seen as a threat, a betrayal to be punished? Lila finished the massage in record time, her movements efficient but devoid of any warmth. She felt drained, as if she had just completed a grueling mental exam. As Mr. Chun left the room, he gave her a quizzical look. "You are very quiet," he commented, not unkindly. "We are encouraged to promote a meditative state," she replied, the lie tasting like ash. Once he was gone, she leaned against the closed door, her body trembling with relief. She hadn't broken the rule, but she had stood on the very edge of the cliff and looked down. She now understood that names had power here. They were not just labels, they were hooks. To speak a name in this room was to paint a target on someone's back for a spirit that had turned jealousy into a blood sport. It was a mistake she swore she would never make. Chapter 9. The Cannibal's Knock. Chaos could undo the most disciplined mind. The night began with a sudden tropical deluge, a torrential downpour that hammered on the spa's roof and rattled the windows. The storm knocked out the power for a full 10 minutes, plunging the spa into a terrifying, absolute darkness broken only by flashes of lightning that cast the gilded Buddhas in monstrous shadows. Therapists scrambled for emergency candles, clients panicked, and the carefully maintained serenity of the spa shattered. By the time the backup generator sputtered to life, the schedule was in disarray. Anong, her face a grim mask of stress, barked orders. "Lila, room 2 now. A new client just arrived. He's waiting." Lila, flustered and on edge from the blackout, rushed down the hall. Her mind was a whirlwind of logistics. Fresh towels, the right oil, the flickering lights. She reached the door to room 2 and, in her haste, forgot everything but the task at hand. She turned the handle and pushed the door open without a second thought. She stepped inside. The first thing she felt was an invasive, numbing cold that shot up her spine and into the base of her skull. Her vision swam. The room, decorated in earthy browns and oranges, seemed to warp at the edges. The second thing she felt was hunger. It was not the spectral, suggestive hunger she had felt from the kraju. This was a physical, primal, all-consuming need. It slammed into her with the force of a physical blow, originating from her own stomach, her own muscles, her own jaw. Her saliva glands flooded. Her mind was filled with a single, horrifying thought. Meat. She looked at her hands. In her mind's eye, they were no longer the hands of a healer. They were twisted, the fingers elongating into sharp, yellowed claws. She felt an almost uncontrollable urge to flex them, to feel them sink into something soft and yielding. The door opened behind her and her client, a slim, unassuming man, walked in. "Hello?" he said. "I'm ready." Lila turned to face him, a welcoming smile plastered on her face by sheer force of will. But inside her own head, a savage, alien voice was screaming. Flesh, bite, tear, devour. The pop, the cannibal spirit. By failing to knock, she hadn't just entered its room. She had invited it in. "Of course," she heard herself say, her voice sounding distant and strange. "Please have a seat. I'll be right with you." She turned her back to him, facing the prep counter, her knuckles white as she gripped its edge. She was fighting for control of her own body. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She could feel the spirit trying to push its way into the driver's seat, to move her limbs, to work her jaw. She saw a flash of herself lunging at the man, teeth bared, and the image was so real she gagged. "Oh, this is my body. These are my hands." She focused on the feeling of the cold marble under her palms, on the scent of the lemongrass oil, on anything real and tangible to anchor herself. She thought of the rule: knock 3 times, a sign of respect, a boundary, a lock she had failed to turn. She squeezed her eyes shut and, in the privacy of her own mind, she knocked. She visualized her hand rapping on the door, 3 sharp, distinct times. Knock, knock, knock. It was a desperate, foolish gambit, a retroactive apology. The ravenous hunger receded. The pressure in her skull lessened. The image of her hands as claws faded, leaving them as her own, trembling but familiar. The spirit was still there, a sullen, hungry presence in the corner of the room, but it was no longer inside her. She had pushed it out. Lila took a deep, shuddering breath and turned back to the client, the fake smile feeling like a Halloween mask. She performed the entire massage in a state of robotic detachment, her mind a fortress against the hungry whispers emanating from the corner of the room. She felt its frustration, its disappointment. It had been so close. When she finally left room 2, she collapsed against the wall in the hallway, slick with a cold sweat. She had broken a rule, not a minor one, but a major one. She had faced one of the spa's horrors not through a mirror or as a bystander, but from the inside out. And she had learned the most terrifying lesson yet. The cages weren't just in the rooms. They were in her own mind, and her own carelessness had just handed a monster the key. Chapter 10. The Protector's Price. The incident in room 2 left Lila deeply shaken. The feeling of being a passenger in her own body, of fighting a parasitic consciousness driven by cannibalistic urges, was a violation that scraped at the core of her identity. She started to doubt everything, including her own memory. Had she really forgotten to knock, or was this place starting to erode her mind? Her mounting fear made her seek out Dao, the younger therapist who had shown her glimmers of sympathy. She found her in the staff garden during a lull between clients, nervously shredding a hibiscus petal. "Dao, I need to talk to you," Lila said, her voice low. Dao flinched, looking around to ensure they were alone. "It's not safe to talk." "I don't care," Lila insisted, sitting beside her on the stone bench. "I need to understand. These things in the rooms. What happens if you can't fight them? What happens if you fail?" Dao's face went pale. She stared at the mangled flower in her hands. "You disappear," she whispered, "like Malay, or worse." "Worse how?" Dao swallowed hard, her eyes darting towards the far end of the spa, towards the room numbered 12. "Have you worked in room 12 yet?" Lila shook her head. "The rule is to pray to the Buddha statue before you leave." "It's not a request," Dao said, her voice trembling. "It's a payment of respect. The statue, it's very, very old. It's not just a decoration. It holds a guardian, a Phythap, a protector ghost. Madame Samchai says it guards the whole spa from outside threats. But its protection comes with a price. It demands respect, unwavering." She leaned closer, her whisper barely audible over the hum of cicadas. "About a year ago, there was a therapist, a man named Chache. He was good, very skilled, but he was from the city. He thought all this was just superstition, silly country beliefs." Lila listened, her blood running cold. "He had a late session in room 12, Dao continued. "He was tired, in a hurry to get home. Anong saw him. He walked right out of the room, didn't even glance at the statue. Anong called after him, told him to go back. He just laughed and waved his hand and said the Buddha would forgive him." Dao paused, taking a shaky breath. "The next day, he didn't show up for his shift. We found out later. He was on his scooter, driving back to his apartment in Bangkok. A truck, out of nowhere, its brakes failed. It ran a red light. Chache was killed instantly. The police said it was a freak accident. But we knew." "You think the ghost?" Lila began, the words catching in her throat. "The Phythap took its payment for the disrespect," Dao finished, her eyes wide with certainty. "It cursed him. You break a rule inside a room, you face the ghost of that room. But you disrespect the guardian of the whole house. It follows you. The curse follows you out of the gate, all the way home. There's no escape." The story settled over Lila like a shroud. This was a new, terrifying dimension to the spa's horrors. The danger wasn't just contained within the 12 rooms. It had reach. The rules weren't just about surviving the night. They were about being allowed to see the next one. Chache's fate was a stark warning. The supernatural threats of Serenity Haven didn't end at the property line. They could follow you, hunt you down, and collect their debt in the mundane world of failed breaks and bad luck. Chapter 11. A glimpse of the master. Lila's fear was slowly calcifying into a grim resolve. She couldn't run. The fate of Chache proved there was nowhere to run to. Her only option was to understand the enemy. And all signs pointed to one person at the center of this web of horrors. Madame Samchai. She began to watch her. From a distance, Lila observed the spa owner's nightly routine. She saw how Samchai moved through the spa not with the air of a proprietor, but of a high priestess, her every step deliberate and meaningful. She saw how the other staff, even the formidable Anong, would lower their eyes and shrink away from her presence. Samchai didn't just command their respect, she commanded their fear. The spa was bordered by a dense, almost impenetrable jungle, but a small, overgrown path snaked away from the back of the staff quarters. The staff were forbidden to use it. Lila, fueled by a mixture of terror and determination, decided to break that rule too. One afternoon, long before her shift began, she followed the path that IT led her through a quarter-mile of grasping vines and buzzing insects to a small, crumbling clearing. In the center stood an abandoned temple, a what that was slowly being consumed by the jungle. Its roof had partially collapsed, and a massive banyan tree had wrapped its roots around the structure like a python strangling its prey. The air here was even heavier than at the spa, thick with the weight of forgotten prayers and sacred decay. Lila hid behind a large, moss-covered stone and waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for, but her instincts told her this place was important. As dusk began to settle, she saw a figure emerge from the path. It was Madame Samchai. She carried a small, lacquered tray. On it, Lila could make out a bowl of rice, a single red hibiscus flower, and a small, ornate bottle filled with a dark liquid. Samchai moved to the front of the ruined temple, set the tray down on the cracked stone steps, and lit a stick of incense. Then, she began to chant. Her voice, usually so smooth and melodic, was different here. It was guttural, raw, full of ancient syllables that seemed to catch and snag in her throat. It was not a prayer of peace. It was a language of command. Lila felt a shift in the atmosphere. The jungle, which had been alive with the sounds of insects and birds, fell utterly silent. A cold, unnatural wind swept through the clearing, making the incense smoke dance wildly. Lila felt a powerful, unseen energy gathering around the temple, drawn by Samkai's voice. It was a dark, hungry energy, a presence that made the hairs on her neck stand on end. Samchai was not praying to something. She was feeding it. She was communing with it, negotiating with the primal darkness that resided here. This was the source. The spa, with its bound spirits, was just a tributary. This abandoned temple was the heart of the river. Lila watched, mesmerized and horrified, as Samchai poured the dark liquid from the bottle onto the roots of the banyan tree. The liquid seemed to sizzle as it made contact, and a faint, sickly sweet smell, like rotting fruit and incense, drifted towards Lila's hiding place. Samkai's chanting reached a crescendo, and then she stopped. She stood in silence for a long moment, her head bowed as if listening to a reply that only she could hear. Then she turned and walked back down the path, leaving the offering on the steps, her duty done. Lila remained hidden until the last light had faded from the sky, her body trembling. She had seen the truth. Madame Samchai wasn't a warden fighting to contain the spirits. She was a puppet master pulling the strings. She was nurturing the darkness, cultivating it, using these ancient rituals to maintain her control over the supernatural forces she had harnessed for her own gain. The spa wasn't a prison for ghosts. It was a farm, and Madame Samchai was the farmer. Chapter 12. The Name in the Dark. The revelation in the temple shattered Lila's last vestiges of denial. She felt like a pawn in a game whose rules were designed for her to lose. Her shifts became a tightrope walk over a pit of fire, her sanity fraying with each passing night. The incident in room 2 had made her doubt her own mind, and she started to wonder if she was hallucinating the whispers, the shadows, the hungry presences. A week later, she was assigned to room 6 again, the room with the jealous ghost. The rule, do not speak the client's name aloud, was seared into her memory, but her mind was exhausted, a chaotic jumble of fear and suspicion. Her client was a pleasant Australian man named David who was clearly nervous about his first Thai massage. He was chatty, peppering her with questions, trying to fill the oppressive silence of the room. Lila responded with curt, professional answers, her focus entirely on not letting his name slip past her lips. "So, you're from America?" he asked. "Bit of a change of pace, eh?" "Yes, a big change," Lila replied, kneading the tense muscles of his shoulders. "Look, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much," he said with a nervous laugh. "This silence is a bit intense. Just want to make sure I'm doing this right. Is this pressure okay?" Lila's exhausted brain, conditioned by years of training, defaulted to its programming. Without thinking, without pausing, the words tumbled out of her mouth. "The pressure is fine, David. Just try to relax." The name hung in the air for a single, horrifying second. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was heavy, solid, and filled with a sudden, bone-deep cold. The pleasant, jungle-green room seemed to dim, the colors leaching away as if a shadow had fallen over it. The prickling sensation of being watched returned, but this time it was 1,000 times more powerful, a wave of pure, undiluted malevolence. "Did you feel that?" David asked, his voice suddenly tight. "It's freezing in here all of a sudden." Lila couldn't answer. The jealous presence was no longer just watching. It was acting. She felt it coalesce in the corner of the room, a vortex of darkness that seemed to suck the very warmth and life from the air. "My God," David whispered, his head turning towards the corner. "What is that?" He started to sit up, his eyes wide with terror. "Lila, what's going on?" "Lie down," Lila commanded, her voice a raw croak. "Close your eyes." But it was too late. The darkness surged forward. It wasn't a shape, not a monster, just a creeping, possessive cold that enveloped the massage table. David let out a choked gasp. Lila, frozen in place on the other side of the table, saw the look of utter terror on his face before the cold mist swirled around him. Obscuring him from view, that it lasted only for a moment. The cold, the darkness, the suffocating presence. It all receded, snapping back to whatever corner of hell it had come from. The room was silent again. The lights seemed bright, the air was warm, and the massage table was empty. David was gone. His towel lay in a rumpled heap. The indentation of his body was still on the table. But the man himself had vanished into thin air. Lila stared, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. She circled the table, her hands outstretched, touching the empty space where a human being had been just seconds before. She checked the bathroom, the closet. Nothing. He was gone. A scream built in her throat, a hysterical, tearing sound. She choked it back, her training and survival instinct kicking in. Panicking would get her killed. Or worse, she had to think. Driven by a new, desperate theory, she fled the room and went not to Anong or Madame Somchai, but to the spa's main office. It was empty, as she knew it would be. She began to search, pulling open drawers, checking behind furniture. Behind a large, heavy teak cabinet, her fingers found a loose wall panel. Prying it open, she revealed a dark, hidden cavity. It was Madame Somchai's personal ritual space. The small chamber was a concentrated nightmare. The walls were covered in faded yellow prayer strips and strange, spidery symbols drawn in what looked like dried blood. On a small altar sat a collection of horrifying objects. A bowl of human teeth, bundles of hair tied with red string, and a row of small, framed photographs. They were pictures of clients. With trembling hands, Lila scanned the photos, and then she saw it. The smiling, pleasant face of the Australian man. David. His picture was already there, waiting for him. He hadn't been a random victim. He had been a target. The breaking of the rule was just the trigger for a trap that had already been set. This wasn't just about appeasing ghosts. This was about feeding them. Madame Somchai was sacrificing clients to these entities, using their life force, their very existence, to power the spa and her own dark ambitions. Lila backed out of the hidden room, a wave of nausea and terror washing over her. She was not a keeper. She was not a pawn. She was an accomplice. Her mistake hadn't just unleashed a ghost. It had sprung a trap. It had helped a sorceress feed her pets. And a man had been erased from existence because of it. Chapter 13. The scent of betrayal. The disappearance of David, the Australian client, changed the game. Lila was no longer just a terrified survivor. She was a witness to a murder. Her fear, once a paralyzing fog, now had a sharp, angry edge. Every interaction with Madame Somchai was a silent battle of wills. Lila would lower her eyes in feigned submission, but her mind was a whirlwind of accusation. And Somchai would watch her, a faint, predatory smile playing on her lips, as if she could hear every treasonous thought. A week after David vanished, Madame Somchai approached Lila as she prepared for her shift. "Lila," she said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "Our most distinguished client, Kunvorapong, has requested a session in room 3 tonight. He requires a specific atmosphere. You will light the triple lotus incense for him, the special blend from my office." It was not a request. It was a command and a test. Rule number 3. Do not light incense in room 3 unless instructed by Madame Somchai. Lila's blood ran cold. This was the first time she had been given the instruction. It was a deliberate, calculated move. Somchai was testing her, seeing if she would obey, knowing full well what the consequence was. Refusal was not an option. It would be an open declaration of war she was not yet equipped to fight. "Of course, Madame Samchai," Lila said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. She retrieved the incense from Samkai's office. It was black, not the usual brown, and smelled of dried flowers and something acrid, like burnt sugar. In room 3, a space decorated with heavy, oppressive tapestries, she lit the 3 sticks as instructed. The smoke was thick and oily, clinging to the air with a cloying sweetness that made her feel dizzy. She performed the massage on Convorapong in a haze, the smoke filling her head. When she finally retired to her own quarters hours later, exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She fell onto her bed, her limbs heavy as lead, and was asleep in seconds. The terror began in the dead of night. She woke up, but she couldn't move. She was pinned to the mattress, her body completely paralyzed. She couldn't turn her head, couldn't lift a finger, couldn't even scream. Her eyes, the only part of her that could move, darted around the moonlit room in a panic. An immense weight settled onto her chest, crushing the air from her lungs. It was a suffocating, intimate pressure, as if a boulder was slowly squeezing the life from her. A shadow detached itself from the ceiling and coalesced over her. It was a formless, dark mass, a blot of pure night, but she could feel its ancient, malevolent consciousness. The Phi-Am, the ghost that sits on sleeping victims. It had been summoned by the incense. This was Samkai's message. "I control the very air you breathe. I control your rest. I can snuff you out in your sleep." Panic gave way to pure, primal terror. Lila's mind screamed, trapped within its silent, fleshy prison. The weight on her chest intensified, and her vision began to tunnel. She was dying. Then, the anger ignited. The image of David's empty massage table flashed in her mind. The memory of the cannibalistic hunger in room 2. The sight of Samkai's ritual at the temple. It was a surge of pure, defiant rage. "No, you will not take me." She couldn't fight it physically, so she fought it with her mind. She focused every ounce of her will, every shred of her life force, on a single point in the center of her chest. She pictured a light, a small, stubborn flame flickering to life in the darkness. She poured all of her anger, her grief for the man in the car, her guilt, her fear, all of it, into that flame, using it as fuel. The shadow above her seemed to recoil. The pressure on her chest lessened for a fraction of a second. It was working. She pushed harder, her mental scream a bonfire of defiance. The flame inside her roared, growing into a blinding white light that filled her mind's eye. With a final, explosive effort, she shouted the word, "Go!" in her mind, and her body convulsed. She shot up in bed, gasping for air, a real, ragged scream tearing from her throat. The room was empty. The weight was gone. She was trembling, drenched in sweat, but she was alive and she could move. She had faced the assassin Samchai had sent for her, and she had won. She had learned a vital new rule of survival. Her own will was a weapon, and she was just learning how to wield it. Chapter 14. The Seductive Call. The nightly storms of the rainy season became Lila's unwelcome companion. The wind would howl through the jungle like a grieving spirit, and rain would lash against the spa, each drop a tiny fist beating on the windows. It was during one of these tempests that Lila was assigned to room 10. Rule number 10. Always lock the window in room 10 before a session. Lila had become meticulous, following the rules with the devotion of a true believer. She entered room 10, a chamber adorned with banana leaf motifs and smelling faintly of night-blooming flowers, and went straight to the large teakwood window. It overlooked a dense grove of banana trees, their broad leaves thrashing wildly in the wind and rain. She slid the heavy bolt into place, feeling the satisfying clunk as it seated. Her client was a quiet Japanese man who drifted off to sleep almost immediately. For an hour, the only sounds were the man's soft snores and the storm's fury outside. Lila worked in a focused trance, the rhythmic motions of the massage a form of meditation. Then came a sound that shattered the peace. A loud crack, followed by the splintering of wood. A powerful gust of wind had slammed a loose branch against the window frame, shattering the lock. The window flew open with a bang, letting in a blast of wind and rain that extinguished the candles and sent papers flying. The room was plunged into near darkness, the only light coming from the hallway. And with the wind came a new scent. It was overwhelmingly sweet, an intoxicating perfume of banana blossoms and something else, something deeply, hypnotically alluring. Lila scrambled to relight a candle, her hands fumbling in the dark. As the flame caught, its wavering light cast flickering shadows on the walls. She looked towards the open window. Standing among the thrashing banana trees just outside was the silhouette of a woman. She was beautiful, ethereal, her form seemingly woven from moonlight and rain. She wore traditional Thai dress, and her long hair flowed in the wind. She beckoned to Lila with one slender hand, a slow, languid gesture of invitation. A serene, promising smile was on her lips. The Phi Nong Tani, the ghost of the banana tree. Lila felt a powerful pull, a deep, resonant yearning to go to the woman. The seductive perfume flooded her senses, clouding her mind, promising an end to all her fear and pain. The thought of joining the beautiful spirit in the rain, of leaving the horrors of the spa behind, was almost irresistible. Her feet took a step towards the window, then another. The client on the table moaned in his sleep, a sound of pleasure and pain entwined. Lila knew the spirit was draining his life force, and she was next to know. The word was a shield in her mind. She remembered the suffocating weight of the Phi Am, the cannibal hunger of the Phi Pop. This was just another trap, cloaked in beauty instead of terror. This ghost didn't attack with rage. It seduced with false promises. She dug her fingernails into her palms, the sharp pain a welcome anchor to reality. She fought against the hypnotic pull, her body feeling heavy and sluggish as if moving through water. She forced her legs to turn away from the window and stumbled towards the door. Her goal wasn't to fight the spirit, but to obey the rule's intent. Keep it outside. With a final, desperate surge of strength, she grabbed the edges of the heavy window and slammed it shut, cutting off the intoxicating scent and the sight of the beckoning spirit. She didn't have a lock, so she dragged a heavy teakwood chair and wedged it under the handles. The hypnotic pull vanished instantly, leaving Lila dizzy and breathless. Her client, who had been pale and still, stirred and took a deep, shuddering breath, a little color returning to his cheeks. He would later mention having the most beautiful, yet unsettlingly draining, dream of his life. Lila leaned against the window, her heart pounding. She had faced another of the spa's horrors and survived, but the encounter left her shaken. The dangers here were so varied, so insidious. They attacked not just her body, but her mind, her will, her deepest desires. Surviving Serenity Haven wasn't just about following the rules. It was about knowing herself well enough to resist its every temptation. Chapter 15. The Doppelganger's Dream. Exhaustion was a disease, and Lila was in its terminal stage. The constant hypervigilance, the nightly encounters with the supernatural, the ever-present fear of Madame Somchai. It was all grinding her down, leaving her a hollowed-out shell. Her mind felt like a frayed rope, threatening to snap at any moment. During a rare 30-minute break between clients near dawn, she stumbled into the staff lounge. It was occupied. With a groan, she sought refuge elsewhere. She found herself standing before the door to room 11. It was empty, quiet, and dark. The rule echoed in her weary mind. Never sleep in room 11, even during breaks. I won't sleep, she promised herself, her body aching for just a moment of rest. I'll just sit for a minute, just close my eyes. She slipped inside, the room's neutral beige tones offering a brief respite from the spa's oppressive opulence. She sank onto a small cot in the corner, a piece of furniture presumably for staff on long shifts, its very presence a temptation. She leaned her head back against the cool wall and closed her eyes. Just for a second. The second stretched into a minute. Her consciousness, heavy and frayed, began to sink. The sounds of the spa faded, replaced by a low, humming silence. She wasn't asleep. Not exactly. She was somewhere else. She found herself standing in a dark, watery version of the spa. The teakwood floors were submerged in a foot of black, still water that reflected a non-existent moon. The air was cold and smelled of wet stone and decay. It was a nightmare reflection, a world between worlds. She heard a faint giggle. Two small children, identical in every way, stood at the far end of the hallway holding hands. They had pale skin, dark, hollow eyes, and wore matching white tunics. The Phi song, twin ghosts. They giggled again, a sound that was both childlike and profoundly ancient. Then, one of them pointed a thin finger at Lila. She turned to see what it was pointing at, and her heart stopped. Another Lila, a doppelganger, was walking through the watery hall. This other Lila looked rested, serene, her face free from the fear and exhaustion that plagued the real her. She wore Lila's uniform. She walked with Lila's gait, but her smile was cold, empty, and utterly devoid of humanity. The twin ghosts skipped over to the doppelganger, who knelt and patted their heads like they were pets. The real Lila tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was trapped, a silent observer in her own nightmare. She watched as her double walked towards the door of room 11 in the real world, ready to step through, ready to take her place. She would be the new therapist, the one who never complained, the one who obeyed Madame Samchai without question. And the real Lila would be trapped here forever, in this dark, watery purgatory. The doppelganger reached for the handle of the door. The word was a silent, psychic explosion. Lila, with a surge of adrenaline born from pure terror, threw herself forward through the black water, lunging not at her double, but at the memory of the cot, the feeling of the wall against her head. She fought to wake up, clawing her way back towards consciousness. She awoke with a violent jolt, falling off the cot and onto the floor. She was back in the real room 11. The room was empty. Her heart was hammering, and she was gasping for air. She had only been out for a minute, maybe two, but she had come perilously close to breaking the rule in the most absolute way possible. She scrambled out of the room, not daring to look back. She understood the rule now. Sleep was a door, and in room 11 it was a door that only opened one way. If you fell asleep here, your replacement, a compliant, soulless copy, would walk out, leaving you trapped in the nightmare on the other side. She had almost lost herself, not to a monster, but to a better rested, emptier version of her own reflection. Chapter 16. The Silent Pact. Lila's close call in room 11 was the final straw. She couldn't do this alone anymore. Her journal of horrors was growing, but her resolve was shrinking. She needed an ally, someone on the inside who understood the stakes. Her gaze fell on Anong. The stern, imposing senior therapist was a zealot for the rules, but Lila now saw her fear not as cruelty, but as a desperate, rigid form of self-preservation. Lila cornered her in the laundry room late one night, amidst the hum of the dryers and the smell of bleach. It was the one place they might not be overheard. "Anong, we have to talk," Lila said, her voice firm. Anong turned from folding towels, her face an impassive mask. "There is nothing to talk about. Do your work. Follow the rules. That is all." A man vanished from my room. David. From room 6. Lila pressed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I saw his picture in her hidden shrine. She's feeding them. She's feeding the ghosts." For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Anong's face. Not surprise, but a deep, weary pain. She looked at Lila, her eyes searching, assessing. "You are a fool for looking," Anong said, her voice low and laced with a surprising bitterness. "Curiosity in this house is a disease with no cure. I'm not the first person to disappear, am I?" What about Malaya? Lila asked. What about the others? Anong's composure finally cracked. She sank onto a wicker bench, the fight draining out of her. Malaya was weak, she said, her voice rough with grief. She was always forgetting. A knock here, a prayer there. She thought they were small mistakes. There are no small mistakes in this house. Anong stared at her hands, her knuckles white. Before Malaya there were others, and before them, there was my sister. Lila waited, her breath caught in her chest. Her name was Ronnie, Anong whispered, the name a painful secret on her lips. She worked here 5 years ago. She was like you, strong-willed, American-trained. She thought she could outsmart the rules. She thought she could expose Madame Samchai. She broke rules on purpose, trying to gather proof. Anong let out a shaky, mirthless laugh. All she gathered was their attention. What happened to her? Lila asked gently. I don't know, Anong said, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. One day, she was just gone. Her room was empty. Samchai said she ran away. But I know. The house took her. One of the spirits. Or maybe all of them. I stay here, I follow every single rule. I enforce them on everyone else because I have to. I am hoping, praying, that one day I will find a way to break Samchai's hold, to find out what happened to Ronnie, to free her spirit if it is trapped here. The confession hung in the humid air, recontextualizing everything. Anong wasn't Samchai's enforcer. She was her prisoner, bound by a desperate, grieving hope. You cannot fight her alone, Anong said, her gaze locking with Lila's. It was no longer a warning, but a statement of fact. Her power is tied to this land, to the spirits she has bound here. She is a sorceress of immense power. Then help me, Lila pleaded. You know more about this place than anyone. Anong was silent for a long moment, the hum of the dryers filling the space between them. There are rituals of binding, she said slowly, and there are rituals of severance, but they require knowledge, power. The source of her strength is not in the spa itself. It is older, deeper. She looked at Lila, a new, fragile alliance forming in her eyes. The old temple in the jungle. She draws her power from it, but she has also hidden her greatest secret there. Her anchor. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A thread of hope in a tapestry of darkness. Lila was no longer alone. She had an ally, one who was scarred, grieving, and just as desperate as she was. Their silent pact was sealed, a conspiracy of two against the master of the house and the legion of ghosts at her command. Chapter 17. The source of the curse, Anong's word, anchor, echoed in Lila's mind. It was a clue, a breadcrumb leading into the heart of the labyrinth. Armed with this new knowledge and a fragile alliance, Lila knew she had to return to the abandoned temple. She waited for a moonless night, the jungle a pitch-black void of unseen life. Anong covered her shift, a silent, terrifying risk for both of them. Lila, dressed in dark clothes, slipped out the back and followed the overgrown path, her small flashlight beam cutting a nervous swath through the darkness. The ruined temple was even more menacing at night. The great banyan tree looked like a skeletal hand clutching the building, and the air was thick with a palpable sense of dormant power. Recalling her first visit, Lila avoided the front steps where Samchai had left her offering. Anong had given her a cryptic instruction. Where the Great Mother's back is broken, look for what is hidden beneath. Lila circled the structure until she found it. A section of the rear wall that had crumbled inwards, a gaping wound in the temple's stone spine. She squeezed through the opening into the temple's dark, musty interior. The main chamber was a wreck of fallen beams and rubble. A large, headless statue of a goddess, the Great Mother, lay toppled on its side. Lila's flashlight beam danced across the floor, searching. Behind the fallen statue, almost completely obscured by debris, she saw it. A heavy, iron ring set into a large stone slab. Her heart hammered. This was it. It took all of her strength to pull the slab aside, the stone grinding in protest. It revealed a set of steep, narrow steps leading down into the earth. The air that rose to meet her was ancient and cold, carrying a faint, sickly sweet smell of decay and ozone. Taking a deep breath, she descended. The steps opened into a circular, man-made chamber, its walls slick with moisture and covered in the same spidery, blood-red symbols as Samkai's hidden office. But the source of the room's horror was what floated in its center. It was a cocoon, a massive, pulsating sphere, 10 feet in diameter, woven from a nightmarish combination of bamboo strips, human hair, and strips of yellow prayer cloth. It hummed with a low, vibrant energy, and a faint internal light pulsed within it, like a monstrous heart, and trapped inside, visible as shimmering, translucent forms, were spirits. Dozens of them, hundreds. Lila saw the tormented face of the maid, the Kraju, her organs trailing behind her. She saw the hunched, grieving form of the Phi Tython Clom. She saw the cannibalistic shadow of the Phi Pop and the beautiful, spectral face of the Nong Tani. All the ghosts of the spa were here, trapped, their individual energies being siphoned and woven together into this single, monstrous battery. And at its very core, radiating an agony and rage that dwarfed all the others, was a woman in a traditional bridal gown, her face contorted in a silent scream of ultimate betrayal. The Phi Tai Hong, the murdered wife, the original, foundational curse of the mansion. Lila stared in horrified awe. This was Samkai's anchor. She hadn't just made a pact with the spirits. She had enslaved them. She had taken their rage, their sorrow, their hunger, and bound them together, using the Phi Tai Hong's primal fury as the furnace to power the entire horrific engine. The spa, the clients, the life force she stole from them, it was all just fuel to keep this spiritual prison running. A prison that granted her wealth, control, and, Lila suspected, a life far longer than nature intended. She had found the source of the curse. It was a masterpiece of sorcery, a monument to cruelty. And as she stood before the pulsating cocoon of souls, she knew that breaking the curse wouldn't be as simple as appeasing a single ghost. She would have to tear down the entire prison. Chapter 18. The Master's Warning. Lila scrambled out of the hidden chamber, her mind reeling. The image of the soul cocoon burned into her vision. She slid the stone slab back into place just as the first hints of dawn touched the sky. Her discovery hadn't brought relief, only a deeper, more profound understanding of the power she was up against. This wasn't just a haunted house. It was a spiritual power plant fueled by eternal suffering. She made it back to her room undetected, but the secret knowledge was a heavy weight. The next evening, she could feel a change in the spa's atmosphere. Madame Samkai's gaze was sharper, her presence more predatory. She knew Lila had seen her secret. The confrontation came at the end of the night, long after the last client had departed. Lila was cleaning room 1, deliberately avoiding the gaze of the mirror, when Madame Samchai appeared in the doorway, a silent, menacing shadow. "You have been a disappointment, Lila," Samchai said, her voice dangerously calm. She stepped into the room, and the door clicked shut behind her. Lila's heart leaped into her throat. She stood up straight, clutching a cleaning cloth in her hand like a weapon. "I've done my job. Your job is to massage clients and follow the rules," Samchai replied, circling her slowly, like a shark inspecting its prey. "It is not to explore crumbling ruins. It is not to uncover secrets that are far beyond your comprehension." Her placid mask was gone. In her eyes, Lila saw a flicker of the same ancient, cold power that emanated from the temple. "They are not just secrets, they are atrocities." Lila shot back, her fear eclipsed by a surge of righteous anger. "You've enslaved them, all of them. You're feeding on their pain." A genuine, chilling smile spread across Samkai's face. "Pain is a currency. Grief is an energy. Rage is a power source. They were lost, chaotic, trapped by their own petty tragedies. I gave them purpose. I gave them structure. I built an ecosystem from their sorrow. Is that not a form of serenity? You call that serenity? A man vanished from room 6. David, I saw his picture on your altar. A necessary sacrifice, Samchai said with a dismissive wave of her hand. The engine requires fuel. The guardians require tribute. His life force was potent. He strengthened the wards for months to come. You should be thanking me. Your little mistake served a higher purpose. The casual cruelty of it, the absolute lack of morality, stunned Lila into silence. I know about your alliance with Anong, Samchai continued, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I know about her foolish hope for her lost sister. Her grief is a particularly delicious flavor in the air of this place. It adds spice. She stopped directly in front of Lila, her dark eyes boring into her. I am offering you a choice, something I did not offer the others. Your will is strong. I saw it when you fought the Am. You have potential. You could be more than a cleaner of rooms. You could be a partner, an apprentice. There is power here for the taking. Immortality, wealth. All you have to do is accept your place in the cycle. And if I don't? Lila asked, her voice trembling but defiant. Madame Samkai's smile vanished. Then the cycle will consume you. I will personally assign you to room 11 for a permanent deep sleep therapy session. Or perhaps I will forget to give you the amulet for room 5 during your next prenatal massage. Or I will simply whisper your name in room 6. There are a dozen ways for you to disappear. The rules you have been using to survive can just as easily be used to execute you. She leaned in closer, her breath cold on Lila's cheek. Your curiosity has been a fatal flaw, Miss Carter. I am the god of this small world I have built. Do not make the mistake of challenging me again. With that final threat hanging in the air, Madame Samchai turned and glided out of the room, leaving Lila alone in the suffocating silence, the battle lines now irrevocably drawn. The choice had been offered: submit or die. Lila, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and resolve, knew her answer. The war for Serenity Haven had begun. Chapter 19. The Art of Survival. Madame Samkai's threat had cleared the air, replacing the fog of uncertainty with the stark, cold clarity of war. Lila was now a marked woman, and every moment within the spa's walls was a test. Survival was no longer about passive obedience but active, strategic defense. She performed her duties with a new, razor-sharp focus, her adherence to the 12 rules becoming a martial art. The knock on room 2's door was not just 3 taps. It was a rhythmic, forceful declaration of her presence. The prayer before the Buddha in room 12 was not a mumbled formality. It was a heartfelt plea for protection, a deliberate forging of a bond with the guardian spirit. She used the rules not just as a shield, but as a sword, her meticulous observance a small act of defiance against Samkai's assumption of her demise. Her alliance with Anong deepened in secret, coalescing in stolen moments in the steamy laundry room or the overgrown back garden. Anong, her grief now sharpened into a weapon, began to pass on her knowledge. It was not the grand, horrific sorcery of Madame Samchai, but something older, smaller, and rooted in the earth, the folk magic of protection. Samkai's magic is a parasite. It binds, it enslaves, it consumes. Anong explained one afternoon, her hands busy weaving blades of grass into a complex knot. Ours is the magic of resistance. It shields, it wards, it helps one endure. She taught Lila how to make small, personal amulets. They would take slivers of wood from a banyan tree blessed by a monk, wrap them in thread spun from unbleached cotton, and tuck a single grain of rice inside, a symbol of life and sustenance. They would soak the charms in salt water under the light of the full moon and whisper prayers of preservation into the knots. These small tokens held no great power, not enough to challenge the mighty spirits of the rooms head-on, but they were something. When Lila wore one tucked into her pocket, The oppressive sadness of room 5 felt a little more distant. The jealous heat of room 6 seemed to cool by a single crucial degree. They were spiritual armor, thin and crudely made, but they were hers. She was no longer just relying on the rules of the prison. She was starting to forge her own keys. Lila began to see the spa not as a collection of individual haunted rooms, but as the ecosystem Samchai had described. A delicate, brutal balance of predator and prey. She realized the rules were the key to navigating it. To survive an encounter with the seductive Nang Tani, one had to demonstrate unwavering focus. To placate the ancestral Phi Pu, one had to show respect through offerings. Each rule was a lesson in the specific psychology of the spirit it governed. She was learning, adapting. Samchai had intended to watch her be consumed by the horrors of the house, but instead, Lila was becoming a native. She was learning the language of the spirits, the customs of this haunted land. Her fear was still a constant companion, but it was no longer her master. It was a tool, a warning bell that kept her sharp. In the heart of her enemy's fortress, Lila was quietly, desperately, learning the art of the fight. Chapter 20. The rot within. The first sign that something was wrong with Kenji was the hunger. Kenji was a young therapist from Isen, quiet and hardworking, with a gentle smile. He had been at the spa for only a few months. Lila noticed him one night in the staff kitchen after his shift, devouring leftover rice and stir-fried vegetables with a frantic, desperate energy. He ate without tasting, his eyes wide and unfocused, stuffing food into his mouth as if afraid it would be taken away. Over the next week, the changes became more pronounced. Kenji grew thin, yet his belly seemed strangely distended. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, which began to take on a wild, feral glint. His movements, once graceful, became jerky and furtive. He would hoard food, hiding bread rolls and fruit in his pockets, his gaze constantly darting around as if expecting an attack. Lila brought her concerns to Ano. "It's Kenji," she said quietly as they sorted clean linens. "He's not right. The way he eats, it's ravenous." Anong finished, her face grim. She stopped her work and looked at Lila, her eyes dark with understanding. "Which room has he been cleaning most often?" Lila's blood went cold. "Room 2, the Phi Pop, the cannibal spirit." They watched him more closely. Kenji was deteriorating rapidly. He started talking to himself in whispers, and once, Lila saw him gnawing on his own knuckles, a look of confused pain and pleasure on his face. He was no longer just hungry. He was being consumed from the inside out. "The spirit has latched onto him," Anong explained, her voice a low, tense whisper. "He must have been careless, forgotten the knock or shown fear. The pop is a patient parasite. It doesn't always possess in a violent rush. Sometimes it burrows in, slowly, hollowing out its host until nothing is left but the hunger." Lila felt a sickening wave of empathy and horror. Kenji wasn't evil. He was sick, infected with a supernatural parasite that was eating his soul. "We have to help him." "How?" Anong countered, her pragmatism a stark wall. "An exorcism requires a monk, a powerful one. If we bring one here, Samchai will know. She will." Anong's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Madame Samchai would not tolerate interference. In fact, this was likely a desired outcome. A therapist slowly losing his mind was just another drop of fear to season the air, another strand of despair to be woven into her cocoon of power. The situation came to a head one night when Kenji was assigned a client in room 2. Lila and Anong exchanged a look of pure panic. Putting a man slowly being possessed by a cannibalistic ghost into its own room with an unsuspecting client was not just a risk, it was a death sentence. "She knows?" Lila breathed, the realization hitting her with sickening force. "Samchai scheduled him for that room on purpose. She wants this to happen." It was another test, a public execution designed to remind everyone of the price of carelessness. They couldn't let it happen. They had to intervene without a monk, without any official aid. It would be the two of them against a hungry ghost that was wearing their friend's face. Chapter 21. The Exorcism of Room 2. They couldn't let Kenji enter the room alone with the client. Anong, using her seniority, intercepted him in the hallway. "There is a problem with the oils in Room 2, she said, her voice firm and authoritative. "Lila and I will prepare it. Wait here." Kenji nodded vacantly, his eyes unfocused, a thin line of saliva at the corner of his mouth. Lila and Anong entered Room 2, their hearts pounding. The room felt charged, expectant. The Phi Pop was awake, anticipating the arrival of its host and its meal. "The knock is the key," Lila whispered, remembering her own terrifying ordeal. "It's a ward, a boundary. Maybe we can use it to push the spirit out of him." "A chant," Anong agreed, her mind working quickly. "A repeated ritual could disrupt its hold. But we need to restrain him. When we begin, the spirit will fight back through him." They had a plan, desperate and thin as it was. They called Kenji into the room, telling the waiting client that they needed a moment to prepare. As soon as Kenji stepped across the threshold, Anong kicked the door shut. "Kenji," Anong said, her voice sharp, "look at me." He looked up, and for a moment, it was him. His eyes were filled with confusion and terror. "Anong, I don't feel right. I'm so hungry." Then his expression shifted. His face contorted, the muscles in his jaw bunching. A low, guttural growl escaped his lips. The Phi Pop was in control, that he lunged, that he wasn't the gentle, slight Kenji anymore. He moved with a terrifying, unnatural strength, his hands clawing for Anong's throat. Lila, acting on pure adrenaline, tackled him from the side, sending them both crashing to the floor. Anong, recovering quickly, used her knowledge of pressure points, pressing hard on a nerve in Kenji's neck. He convulsed and went momentarily limp, giving them the chance they needed. They pinned him to the floor, his body thrashing beneath them, growls and snarls ripping from his throat. "Now!" Anong shouted. Lila began to chant, her voice shaking but loud. She pounded her fist on the floor beside Kenji's head, mimicking the ritual knock. "In the name of the Buddha, we knock 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. We draw the line. Knock, knock, knock. This body is not your home. Knock, knock, knock." Anong joined in, her voice a powerful alto, her own fist pounding the floor in rhythm. "This soul is not your food. Knock, knock, knock. Go back to the shadows. Knock, knock, knock." The effect was immediate. Kenji screamed, a sound that was half human, half animal. His body arched, his back lifting off the floor. A black, oily smoke began to seep from his mouth and nostrils, smelling of rot and stale blood. The Phi Pop, enraged, fought back. The temperature in the room plummeted. The lights flickered wildly, but Lila and Anong held on, their chant becoming a solid wall of sound, the rhythmic pounding on the floor a relentless, percussive assault on the intruding spirit, with a final, ear-splitting shriek that vibrated through the very foundations of the spa. The black smoke erupted from Kenji's mouth in a single violent cloud. It shot across the room and slammed into the far wall, dissolving into nothing. The room was suddenly silent. The lights steadied. The oppressive cold vanished. Kenji lay limp on the floor, unconscious, but breathing peacefully. The feral look was gone from his face. He was just Kenji again. They had done it. They had faced down one of the spa's nightmares and won. It was a small victory in a massive war, but it was a victory nonetheless. It proved that the spirits, for all their terror, were not invincible. Proved that Samkai's control was not absolute. And it proved that 2 desperate women, armed with nothing but courage and knowledge, could light a candle in the darkest of rooms, Chapter 22. The Queen's Gambit. They smuggled Kenji out of room 2 and to his quarters, telling the client he had suddenly fallen ill. Kenji woke up hours later, weak and disoriented, with no memory of the event save for a vague, nightmarish hunger. He knew, however, that Lila and Anong had saved him. His gratitude forged a new link in their fragile chain of rebellion. The incident crystallized Lila's understanding of Samkai's plan. She wasn't just going to let him get hurt. Lila explained to Anong as they met in the pre-dawn gloom of the garden. She was using him. The Phi Pop wasn't just going to attack the client. It was going to feed. It was fattening itself up, using Kenji as its vessel. Anong nodded, her face grim. The spirits grow stronger when they are fed. It is the nature of things. But it's more than that, Lila insisted, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying precision. Think about David, the man from room 6. He wasn't just killed, he vanished. His life force was siphoned off completely. Where did it go? Anong. Lila didn't wait for an answer. She already knew. It went to the cocoon, to the temple. David wasn't just a random meal for the Phi Fray. He was a sacrifice. His energy was a direct offering to the thing at the center of it all. The Phi Tai Hong, the vengeful, murdered bride whose rage was the furnace that powered the entire system. Samchai isn't just keeping the spirits strong, Lila continued, pacing the stone path. She's using them as conduits. The smaller spirits are her hunters, her collectors. They gather the life force from clients and sometimes staff and channel it all back to the primary ghost. The final, terrible piece of the puzzle slid into place. It was about Samchai herself. Her ageless face, her unnatural vitality. It's for her, Lila whispered, the words tasting like poison. She's feeding the Phi Tai Hong to keep it powerful, and in return, the spirit is granting her its own supernatural energy. It's a parasitic loop. The ghost's rage keeps it from passing on, and Samchai is using that rage as a fountain of youth. She's drinking the pain of that house to keep from aging, to stay in power. The clients aren't just fuel for the prison. They're ingredients in her immortality potion. It was a queen's gambit of breathtaking cruelty. Samchai had sacrificed her pawns, clients, staff, dozens of bound spirits, to keep her queen, the Phi Tai Hong, on the board. And in doing so, she had made herself immortal, the undead ruler of a kingdom of pain. How do we fight that? Anong asked, the scale of Samkai's evil seeming to crush the air around them. If her life is tied to the spirit, and the spirit is tied to the cocoon, then we have to find a way to break the connection, Lila said, her resolve hardening into steel. We can't just free the spirits. We have to sever Samkai's lifeline. And to do that, I need to find a weakness in the system. A backdoor. Her eyes drifted towards the main building, towards the hallway that held the 12 rooms. Her gaze settled on the door to room 11. The room of the doppelganger, the room of the nightmare realm. It was the most dangerous, most insane idea she'd ever had. But it was the only one she had left. I have to go in, she said, looking at Anong. Not by accident. On purpose. I have to break Rule 11. Chapter 23. Descent into the Nightmare. The decision, once made, settled in Lila's gut like a block of ice. To willingly break Rule 11, never sleep in room 11, was to walk knowingly off a cliff, hoping to find a ledge on the way down. It was a desperate gamble, a psychic infiltration into the heart of the enemy's network. You cannot go alone, Anong insisted. The Phi Song will try to trap you. If your will falters, you will be lost, and that thing will take your place. I will stand guard. I will prepare a severance ritual. If you do not return within 1 hour, I will perform it. It may sever your connection to your body permanently, but it is better than letting that thing walk out wearing your face. It was a grim failsafe, but it was better than nothing. They chose the hour just before dawn, when the spa was at its quietest, the energies of the night at their lowest ebb. Anong stood vigil outside the door of room 11, a blessed Chris dagger in her hand and a grim look on her face. Lila entered the sterile, beige room, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She lay down on the small cot, the same one from her previous near-miss. She had her small, handmade amulet clutched in one hand. She closed her eyes, not trying to fight sleep, but inviting it. She focused on her goal. Find a weakness in the soul cocoon. Find the seam in Samkai's power. Sleep came quickly, pulling her down into its black depths. She emerged, as before, in the watery nightmare version of Serenity Haven. The black water lapped silently at the walls. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and regret. The twin ghosts, the Phi Song, were waiting for her at the end of the hall, their dark, hollow eyes fixed on her. They giggled, the sound echoing in the unnatural silence. "You came back," they seemed to say in a single, shared thought that slithered into her mind. "You want to stay this time?" "No," Lila said, her voice surprisingly steady in the dreamscape. "I'm here for answers." The twins giggled again. "The mistress is strong. Her prison is perfect. There are no answers here. Only peace." One of the twins gestured behind Lila. She turned, and the watery hallway dissolved. She was no longer in the spa. She was in a car, sitting in the driver's seat. Rain was lashing against the windshield. The radio was playing a song she hadn't heard in years. And in the passenger seat next to her, smiling, was Michael, her fiancé, the ghost from her past. "Hey you," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered it, warm and full of life. "You were a million miles away." The breath caught in her throat. The grief, the guilt, it was all there, fresh and raw as if the accident had happened yesterday. This was the ghost's trap. They weren't offering her a generic paradise. They were offering her the one thing she craved most, a second chance. "This isn't real," she whispered, her hands gripping a phantom steering wheel. "Isn't it?" Michael asked, his smile impossibly gentle. "We can just keep driving. Forget about Thailand. Forget about the spa. We can go home. All you have to do is stay. It's so much easier to stay." The temptation was a physical force, an undertow pulling her into the beautiful, impossible lie. The pain of her loss was a gaping wound, and the ghosts were offering a perfect balm. But she remembered Anong's grief for her sister, Kenji's vacant eyes, David's empty massage table. Her pain was not the only pain in the world. She had to face it, not run from it, not bargain it away. "It was my fault," Lila said, the words she had never dared to speak aloud. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the phantom rain on the windshield. "I looked away for a second. It was my fault. It was an accident." "Dream," Michael said, his voice soft. "Let it go. Stay here with me." "No," Lila said, her voice gaining strength. She looked at him, at the perfect, loving memory of his face, and she made her choice. "I love you, and I have to let you go." As she spoke the words, the image of Michael began to fade. The car dissolved. The rain stopped. She was back in the watery hallway. The twin ghosts looked at her, their heads cocked, their smiles gone. They looked confused. Her grief had been their leverage. By facing it, she had disarmed them. She strode past them, her purpose clear. With her own personal ghosts finally laid to rest, her mind was sharp and focused. She walked to the center of the nightmare spa, to where the soul cocoon would be in the real world's temple. She closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, searching for the connection, the weakness. And then she saw it, a vision clear as day. The cocoon, pulsating with stolen life, and Samchai in the real world performing a ritual. She was placing an object into a small niche at the base of the cocoon's altar. A small clay doll, dressed in a scrap of silk from her own robe. It was a classic sympathetic link, an anchor. The cocoon wasn't just tied to the Phi Tai Hong. It was tied directly to Samchai herself. Her life wasn't just being sustained by the magic. It was the magic. If the anchor was destroyed, the connection would sever. The prison would lose its warden, and the entire system would collapse. Lila had her answer. She felt a pull, a violent yanking sensation. Anong's hour was up. She was performing the severance ritual. Lila opened her dream eyes and flew backwards, tumbling out of the nightmare realm and back into her own body. She shot up from the cot, gasping, back in room 11. Anong was standing over her, the kriss raised, tears in her eyes. "You were gone too long," Anong choked out, lowering the dagger. "I'm back," Lila said, her voice raspy but triumphant. "And I know how to bring the whole thing down." Chapter 24. Facing the ghost in the mirror. The knowledge Lila brought back from the nightmare realm changed the equation from one of survival to one of attack. They had a target, Samkai's anchor, the clay doll hidden in the secret chamber of the temple. Destroying it would, in theory, sever Samkai's connection to the cocoon, unraveling her power and her immortality. But getting to it would be a suicide mission. Samchai would sense their intent the moment they set foot on the temple grounds. The temple was her holy of holies, the source of her power. She would defend it with everything she had. "We cannot fight her there," Anong said, her face etched with worry. "She is strongest at the temple. It would be a slaughter." "Then we don't fight her there," Lila replied, a desperate, audacious plan forming in her mind. "We create a diversion, a massive one. We force her to focus her power elsewhere. We turn her own prison against her." The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. They would deliberately break the rules, not just one but several in rapid succession. They would unleash the spirits from their carefully managed rooms, creating chaos so total that Samchai would have no choice but to divert her attention from the temple to contain the pandemonium inside the spa itself. "It's insane," Anong breathed. "We would be in the middle of it. The spirits would attack us too." "That's where the rules come in," Lila explained, her eyes alight with a feverish intensity. "We don't just break them. We manipulate them. We use our knowledge to navigate the chaos we create. We can use one spirit's weakness against another's strength. We can set them on each other. We turn the spa into a spiritual war zone, and while the warden is busy putting out the fires, we sneak out the back and go for the anchor." They brought Kenji into the plan. He was weak, but his loyalty was absolute. His job would be the most important. While Lila and Anong created the diversion, he would be the one to sneak to the temple, find the hidden chamber, and destroy the doll. He was the least likely to be noticed, the one Samchai would underestimate. The night of the uprising was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the spa itself was holding its breath. The three of them met in the garden, their faces pale in the moonlight. "Ready?" Lila asked. Anong and Kenji nodded grimly. The pact was sealed. Their first target was room 4, the home of the mischievous Faifong. While Anong stood watch, Lila walked to the door during a session and simply slid it open, then walked away. Within minutes, the chaos began. A tray of glasses in the lounge suddenly flew off a table and shattered. A client in room 8 screamed that his massage oil had turned icy cold. The invisible trickster was loose, sowing minor but disruptive discord throughout the facility. Next, room 7. The lights. While the staff was distracted by the Fong's antics, Anong crept to the fuse box that controlled the lighting for the wing containing room 7 and, with a heavy wrench, smashed the connection. The wing plunged into darkness. A moment of silence, then a heartbroken wail echoed through the halls. The cry of May Nak, the tragic ghost, unleashed by the sudden dark. Her powerful, grief-fueled rage was a major blow to the spa's tranquility. Madame Samchai appeared in the main hall, her face a mask of cold fury. Her eyes scanned the chaos, and she began barking orders at the terrified staff, her focus entirely on damage control. The diversion was working. While she was distracted, Lila moved to her final, most dangerous target, Room 1. She had to face the ghost in the mirror. She strode into the crimson and gold room. It was well after midnight. She looked at her reflection in the ornate mirror. Tired, scared, but resolute. "I know you're in there," she whispered. "I know you're hungry." She waited, her heart pounding. The reflection flickered. The face of the Kraju, the betrayed maid, swam into view, her eyes burning with hatred, her entrails dangling grotesquely. She locked eyes with Lila, the psychic connection snapping into place. The vile, alien hunger flooded Lila's mind. But this time, Lila was ready. She didn't fight the hunger. She didn't recoil from the horror. She accepted it. She opened her mind to the spirit's pain, to the centuries of rage and betrayal. She didn't offer a prayer or a ward. She offered empathy. "I'm not your enemy," she sent through the psychic link. "She is the one who keeps you trapped here, the one who uses your pain as a cage. Help me and I will help you be free." The Kraju's face contorted, its rage momentarily replaced by confusion. It had only ever known fear and revulsion from those who saw it. This offering of an alliance, of understanding, was something new. Lila broke the gaze and turned from the mirror. "The choice is yours," she said to the empty room and walked out. She had planted a seed of rebellion in one of the spa's most powerful spirits. The chaos in the spa was escalating. Staff were running, clients were screaming. Maynak's wails were punctuated by the sound of smashing objects from the Faifong. It was the perfect cover. As Samchai raged in the main hall, trying to restore order, Lila and Anong gave Kenji the signal. He slipped out the back door, a small hammer clutched in his hand, and disappeared into the jungle, heading for the temple. The final act had begun.